Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Crime Time. My guest today is one of my favorites, former federal and state prosecutor Francey Hakes. Francey is joining us from Atlanta, Georgia via Skype. She oversaw all child exploitation efforts at the Department of Justice, which includes the FBI and the U.S. Marshals, and she's also the CEO at Francey Hakes Consulting, LLC. Now today we're going to be talking about 4 cases, the first of which is that 51-year-old man in Pennsylvania, Lee Kaplan, who was living with 11 children inside his Cape Cod-style home, and also with an 18-year-old girl who had been gifted, and I'm putting that in quotes, to Kaplan at the age of 14 by her parents in exchange for his help with the parents' outstanding debts. Now, the 18-year-old claimed that they had 2 children together. She told investigators that she and Kaplan had these 2 children, but investigators remained skeptical. Who are all these other children that are there? Were they also gifted, or are they the progeny of this really awful union of a juvenile and a sexual predator? Our second case involved alleged sexual predator. Sorry about that. Our second case involves new developments in the 20-year-old murder of poor JonBenét Ramsey, the arrest of a neighbor and child sex offender who was a suspect in her murder many years ago, was recently arrested on possession of child pornography, and that's brought new attention to the case. Our third case is going to talk about the pretrial hearing and the Angelika Graswalk case. She's the one who was accused of murdering her fiancé during a kayak trip on the Hudson River last year. And now they are in a pretrial hearing where a state police investigator has testified that Angelika, who is accused of this murder, told him that she took her fiancé's paddle after he'd capsized and held it while he begged her to call 911. The detective has also testified that Graswalk said she felt trapped by her fiancé and wanted to be free from his demands of sex with him and another woman. And finally, something Francey and I have been covering all this time, our fourth case involves yet another acquittal of an officer charged in connection with the death of Freddie Gray, who died after being taken into custody by the Baltimore police. So, Francey, we're going to start off with this really, really sick case. The police knocked on the bright blue door of Lee Kaplan's home in Festerville, Pennsylvania. When the detective stepped inside, the children scattered, some hid in a chicken coop in the back of the house. In total, 11 children and an 18-year-old girl lived inside this home. Lee Kaplan, the man that was the owner of it, faces statutory sexual assault, unlawful contact with a minor, and aggravated indecent assault charges after authorities searched his home and discovered that he was the only adult living in the residence with the girls, who ranged in age from 6 months to 18 years. And at least 8 of the girls in Kaplan's home were sisters, according to the police. The 18-year-old, as I was just telling you, told investigators that she and Kaplan had 2 kids together, a 3-year-old and a 6-month infant. She also told police that she was 14 when her parents handed her over to Kaplan in exchange for his help with several outstanding debts. The teen's father also allegedly told police that he gave his daughter to Kaplan in exchange for financial support. Apparently, he was unaware that that was illegal. And meanwhile, neighbors revealed that they'd known something was wrong for years. And in a statement provided to CNN, attorneys representing the parents, Sevilla Stolzfus and her husband, said that they are both presumed innocent of any wrongdoing. And he added that all they have is unconfirmed allegations. Anybody could be arrested, your friends, your neighbors, your family, even you, but it doesn't mean you're guilty. And they said, the defense attorneys, let's just wait until all the facts are in. So let's get started, Francey. I want to welcome you back to the show. I'm glad you're here to talk about this case. It's really something that you have a great deal of experience with. First of all, the thing that is truly troublesome here are reports, and we saw this also in the J.C. Dugard case, of the police being repeatedly informed that something was amiss at this house, that there were red flags raised, and there were reports to police that were discounted. They said that some of the reports weren't credible. Finally, the police actually did go to the house after a neighbor demanded that they get to that house and interview the children. So how does this keep happening where there are 12 girls, or these 11 girls found inside the house plus the 18-year-old? Let me just ask you, like, how does that continue to happen? Why don't the police listen?
Yeah, that's a great question, Allison, and it's incredibly frustrating because there are lots of people like me who've been out, and you, publicizing these kinds of cases. I've been gone from the Department of Justice now for 4 years, and even while I was there, I've spent the last 20 total years training law enforcement, especially, but the public, youth-serving organizations, but especially law enforcement on what to look for. And this is an absolutely abysmal failure on the part of law enforcement, and even some on the part of the neighbors. I mean, you had the neighbor who was very brave to come forward in the end and to insist. I think what she said was, I insisted that the police actually see the kids. And that was a very brave thing, but she noted that something that disturbed her had happened as much as a year ago, and she thought it was strange, but didn't think she had enough evidence. And I think that that's where things are breaking down. First, you've got neighbors who think, well, it's none of my business. Which is just wrong. Child safety is the business of all of us. It's the business of the community. And then you secondly have the police officers, whoever came out to the house or took the reports from the neighbors, just completely discounting what was going on there. I mean, these were red flags all over the place when you've got children that are not in school, who literally scurry around town, afraid to make eye contact. It sounds like a cult. I do not understand why the police didn't take it seriously from the beginning.
You know, it's an interesting thing. They were unkempt. I think that there's an interesting angle here, and I wondered what you thought about it, that there is a lot of commentary about how Kaplan appeared to be a religious man, and that the parents who, quote unquote, gifted, allegedly, their daughter to Kaplan did so were also from an Amish community. And I wonder if there is some reticence on the part of law enforcement when there might be religious rules in place in terms of child rearing, if they're being homeschooled or whatever the situation, and how you advise law enforcement and also neighbors on the issue of not crossing that line in terms of squelching or trying to interfere with religious freedom.
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, this case reminds me a little bit of the Elizabeth Smart case. If you remember, when Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped, there were reports that during the period of time she was gone, she was seen in the company of the husband and the wife. I can't remember his name. Was it Barfield? Something like that. She was seen in their company behaving strangely, sort of almost veiled, but disguised and acting in the way that has been described these girls acted. And I think people hesitated to get involved because they thought, because he was always spouting off about religion and the Bible, they thought, well, they're religious. I don't want to discriminate against someone religious. And what I say to people all the time in these trainings, and in fact, I'll be in California on Sunday doing a community training. The community is bringing me in to train the community on child sexual abuse. I'll be telling the community exactly that. When your hackles go up, when your spider sense tingles, whatever it is you want to call it, don't ignore that. That is sort of an atavistic instinct that we all really have still, but suppressed, that says danger, whether it's you're in danger or someone else is in danger. Don't suppress that. Call the police. They're supposed to be the professionals, and they should come out and investigate, or the Department of Family and Children Services, whatever it's called in your state. But don't let it just sit and fester. How long did these girls then suffer? From her own testimony or from her own statements, she said she's got a 3-year-old with him, which means he raped her when she was 14, because then she had a period of time where she was pregnant. She had the child when she was 15. She's now 18. So how many years of sexual abuse did she and the other girls in that house suffer because people were uncomfortable talking to the police about it?
I completely agree with you, and I do think that the fact that you might be interfering with somebody's religious freedoms is a question for the courts. I mean, right. You know, report what you see. There were all this commentary about the kids not going to school, never being outside. I don't get the hesitation. I mean, there are police, you know, I get and understand that some of the police ignored the reports, and that is one aspect of this case that I'm sure is going to get a lot of scrutiny. But I also think that neighbors need to get involved. I mean, as you said, they're children, and if you're wrong, it'll get sorted out. And you know, it's kind of a good mistake to be making, to say, just go and check and be sure those children are okay, and that they're being taken care of, and it's not a house where this, you know, this is my next question for you. What do you think about who these other kids are? Do you think they were also, quote unquote, gifted?
I don't know. I mean, I can't, you know, I hope to God no pun intended. I hope that there aren't that many people out there that are willing to gift their children. But as you and I know, as we've talked about many times, Allison, there are lots of desperate people who will do anything all over the world, who will sell their children for pennies or dollars if they're desperate enough or they think they're desperate enough. So I don't know who they are, whether they're really siblings. I certainly hope they can find out, but I guarantee you that the police have contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they're going to see if those kids are in their system anywhere. Have they been kidnapped? Who are they? I hope they find out quickly and reunite them with their actual family.
Now, in terms of actual abuse and the way the children are reportedly behaving, that they have been indoctrinated, they're afraid to say certain things. I mean, I'm sure it's things that you have seen many, many times in your experience. What are those kinds of signs? I mean, we are hearing a lot about the conditions of the house and the fact that the children were unkept. But what are some of the other signs, besides relying on your senses, and clearly many of the neighbors felt something was wrong, but besides that, what are some of the other signs that people should be looking at, besides the fact that there are like all women living with one old man in a house?
Right. Well, of course, these were screaming.
Oh, girls. I mean, young girls.
Yeah, these were screaming warning signs that I think anybody looking at and did think there was something wrong, but they didn't quite know what. And that seclusion is a huge problem. You know, lots of people homeschool their kids, but that doesn't mean that they're secluded in the house. They still have activities. They engage in activities with other homeschooled children, because homeschool is much bigger now than it used to be. And so there are communities of homeschoolers, and they have football teams and music activities and all sorts of things that they do together so that children get that socialization. So the lack of socialization, the way that they were unkempt, certainly suggests they're not being cared for. And it's appalling that the police didn't inspect the children just with that one allegation. The children are being neglected. I mean, neglect is something within the police and the Department of Family and Children's Services purview. They should have been investigating that. So you look for that. You also look for the number of children in the house without there being an apparent adult woman. I don't know how anyone could have thought, especially when the oldest girl arrived at the age of 14, there's no mother. How are there that many children, and where did the infant come from? So these are all things that people should have taken note of and reported to police earlier. And it's just the conduct of the police in this case, and you know, I've taken a lot of heat on this show for my defense of police, and I defend law enforcement quite a bit because I know many, many really good cops and agents. But here, they need training, they need it now, and somebody needs to get fired.
I agree with you completely on this one, but I also think that we can take a lesson here in terms of our reluctance to get involved. I mean, it's certainly not something that you and I share, but I mean, I think people need to understand, better to be wrong. Better to be wrong than to leave somebody to be sexually abused for years and years. Better to be wrong. So let's move to our next topic, which is the topic and the latest about JonBenét Ramsey, the latest news about the arrest of a former suspect in the crime. Gary Howard Oliva, 52, made headlines this week and brought attention back to the murder case of JonBenét Ramsey. Oliva was once investigated for the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, and he was found, I mean, nobody was not arrested at all. And this week he was arrested on child pornography charges. He's now facing charges for the sexual exploitation of a child. He was arrested after the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received a cyber tip from Google that suspected child pornography was being uploaded to a Gmail account. And a Boulder police investigator reviewed sexually explicit images of a girl between 4 and 7 years old attached to an email account registered to Oliva, according to the police officer's affidavit. He is also accused of uploading 22 separate sexually explicit images, all of them of children younger than 10. Some engaged in sex acts, either with each other or with adult males, is what the affidavit said. Now, Oliva was among those suspects, as I said, who rose to police attention after the murder of child beauty queen JonBenét in 1996. Now, just so you all know, you can look back at episodes of Media Mayhem and you will see that I spoke with Jim Clemente at great lengths. He was one of the investigators when JonBenét was murdered, and he had a number of concerns about her murder, believing that it was, in fact, an inside job. He said that there were certain issues, including the fact that the ransom note and the pen used to write the ransom note were inside the home, meaning that whoever had come there supposedly to kidnap JonBenét had not brought any kind of materials to write a ransom note. The fact that the two parents were not interviewed separately at the request of the district attorney, who could not believe that any parents would do to their child what had happened to JonBenét. And finally, he also spoke about the fact that he never felt that this was a ransom situation or any kind of a kidnapping. And he goes on at great length. And if you want to see Jim Clemente talking about this case, you can look back at Media Mayhem. And he also spoke about it on Crime Time. Now, let me get to you, Francey, because the thing that disturbs me most about this case is perhaps this guy is a viable suspect. He was found with some pictures of JonBenét. He was investigated back at the time of her murder. But the thing that is even more disturbing here, well, or equally as disturbing, is the fact that here he is going about his business, still engaging in looking at child pornography and God knows what else, and exploitation of a minor, and probably, I mean, who knows what else? I guess I should say that. How does somebody like this, who was previously convicted, what's he doing out and about and in the neighborhood, busy downloading as he pleases?
Well, you know, that's a great question, Allison. It's very distressing to me that child sex offenders, on the whole, get very little time in jail, almost no matter what they do, and especially in cases around the country. And I have to say, it's federal and local child pornography cases. They often get zero jail time. One of the things that really bothers me about this Oliva case, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but Oliva, is that he is out on 10,000, or he's not out, he's in. But the judge gave him a $10,000 bond. Now, he could bond out tomorrow if someone is willing to put up $1,000 for him. It is ridiculous to me that the judge has given him what is a very makeable bond. So he's saying to the community, this guy is not a danger to the community, and that could not be further from the truth. NCMEC gets cyber tips like this, like are described in the story as you summarized earlier. NCMEC gets literally millions of cyber tips a year since 2000, when they first started reviewing cyber tips under a mandate from Congress. They've reviewed hundreds of millions, literally hundreds of millions of images and cyber tips for just this exact kind of thing. So there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people out there that are downloading child pornography right now. And research tells us that those are the strongest indicators of actual pedophilia. That is, downloading child pornography is a very strong indicator of pedophilia. That is a primary sexual interest in children. So this guy is in jail at the moment. Hopefully he won't make his bond, but I certainly hope, given his past history, what seemed to me with the photographs he was carrying at the time of the murder of JonBenét Ramsey, of an obsession with the child, which fits right in with his pedophilia, I hope he gets a good long jail sentence. I hope he never gets out.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there is some sort of disconnect that the judges don't seem to understand, that looking at just the mere pictures, that they don't see that as a victimization of anyone, that is almost, it's sick, but it's not particularly harmful to anybody in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a variety of factors. I think these offenders tend to look like the federal judges. They're very similar in their socioeconomic classes. It tends to be the higher educated, the sort of higher socioeconomic status offenders that have, access to iPhones and computers, who commit these kinds of crimes. I think many judges don't look at the images, so in their heads they think to themselves that maybe this is teens having sex, or children, nude in the bathtub kind of photographs, or it's very nebulous to them, the connection between an actual child and this offender, when nothing could be further from the truth. I hate to get too graphic, but I think your viewers can handle it. It's not a situation where you have offenders sort of perusing these photographs and videos, which, by the way, are shockingly violent, many times with sound, and are of horrible, horrible sexual assaults of little children down to as little as infants. This guy was obviously interested in children as young as 4. And they're not just staring at them as if you're shopping for a couch. They are achieving sexual gratification looking at these images because they are sexually interested in children and achieve gratification by looking at the sexual abuse of children. I do not understand, and most jurors don't understand, why the judicial system doesn't seem to get that people with a sexual interest in children who download child pornography represent a clear and present danger to children right this minute and forever.
Yeah, I think that there should be a similar outrage that we saw going on with the young man that was convicted of rape and got 6 months in prison to, although there hasn't been a trial at this point, but certainly in terms of the bond, I mean, of the bail amount, that the idea that this guy was looking at pictures of young children having sex with adult males is, and that somebody is taking those pictures to feed this guy's fantasy or his reality. We don't know, as you just talked about. I think that somebody should be up in arms about the fact that this judge set that bail that low. It's disturbing. I mean, we get, you know, I mean, this is somebody enjoying the rape of children as for sexual gratification. So I was deeply disturbed by that. I was intrigued somewhat about the case and the fact that perhaps the suspect had been missed and that he was interviewed. But I do think that when we talk about this case and you talk to people that were involved, there's a lot of defensive posturing because the offender was never found. What do you think? Do you think this is a viable suspect?
You know, he looks good. I mean, he certainly fits what would be a profile for a stranger if you believe that the target was a kidnapping of the child. But given all of the facts, and unlike Jim Clemente, I wasn't there at the time, so I didn't have access to all the evidence that Jim's been able to review. But my opinion on this case has always been similar to Jim's, that it was an inside job. Christmas Eve, the child was found in the basement. There were a lot of investigative mistakes here for sure, but you know, most children are sexually abused and or murdered by someone close to them. Stranger killings of children, especially in their own home with their own family there on Christmas Eve, remarkably odd and rare and hard to believe.
Okay, I'm going to switch to another topic, and we're going to talk about the kayak murder. So a pretrial hearing is underway in the Angelika Graswalk case. She's charged with second-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter in the death of her fiancé, 46-year-old Vince Villafor. There's a dispute over whether an alleged admission made by Angelika to the police before she was read her Miranda rights should be heard by a jury at her trial. This is a perfect topic to talk to Francey about as a former prosecutor. There's been a lot of problems with this case. Villafor's boat capsized while he and Angelika were kayaking on the Hudson in April 2015. Villafor's body was recovered in May 2015. Now, prosecutors are saying that Graswalk, Angelika, removed a plug from Villafor's kayak, causing the kayak to take on water and sink. There is no forensic evidence in the case and no eyewitnesses. Graswalk has pleaded not guilty to both the charges against her. Now, another police investigator testified in court on June 6 that Graswalk told a detective in an April 29, 2015 meeting on Bannerman's Island, that's the spot where Graswalk was rescued after Villafor disappeared, that there was a plug on Villafor's kayak and that she'd taken it out. And Graswalk was not read her Miranda rights prior to that 45-minute unrecorded conversation that she had with detectives on the island. Now, police say that she became a suspect only after that meeting. And as I said, Graswalk has pleaded not guilty. So here's the interesting thing, Francey, that there is a recorded statement that happens after she's read her rights. This unrecorded statement where they said she isn't a suspect has been countered by a witness who was on the island while police were aggressively questioning her about the drowning or the death or what has happened to her husband. So first, let me ask you, the interrogation of the defendant's not recorded. It's done before she's read her rights. Police say they were just having a chit-chat. A witness says that's not the truth. The interrogation or the chit-chat was 11 hours long, and she made several calls while her husband was drowning to 911. So should the confession be allowed in based on the policeman's testimony?
Well, actually, what most people don't understand, because, Miranda rights are so ubiquitous on TV. We see every TV show that has anything to do at all with crime and criminals, you see them read their Miranda rights the second the police encounter them. The reality, though, is that Miranda only requires a suspect to be read his or her rights if it is a custodial interrogation. And if there is evidence that a reasonable person would have felt free to leave during the time of the 11-hour interview, then it's held that it's not a custodial interrogation, and therefore Miranda rights did not attach. And so what's interesting about this case is you talk about, it obviously was an incredibly long interview on an island, but that's not the police station, which is typically where Miranda rights attach. I didn't read anything about her being handcuffed. It is certainly reasonable for the police, when they first approached her and all they know is they've received 911 calls of someone missing or in distress or having drowned, and they want to get the story. What are the facts? So when they say she wasn't a suspect at first, that makes sense to me. But, that's really kind of irrelevant. Whether or not the police believe she was a suspect isn't the inquiry under Miranda. It's whether or not a person in the defendant's shoes, not her, but a person in her shoes, would have felt free to leave. And it'll be interesting to see what the court says, but I suspect they may rule that it's not a custodial interrogation, and therefore it comes in.
I don't think she felt free to leave. I have to say, I think that I get what the test is going to be, and we're going to have to see what the court has to say. But I think you've really clarified the issue, because I think there is a sense that how they're talking to her, if they're aggressive or not aggressive, was really the test. She is claiming that she didn't feel free to leave. And she said that after hours and hours, she finally said, I wanted him dead, and now he's gone. She says that they kept asking me the same questions 100 times. I knew I was innocent at my breaking point, and I gave them what they wanted. This goes along the lines of what we've talked about in the past in terms of potentially a false confession. So there's also going to be that issue if you talk to somebody for 11 hours and they feel that they weren't free to go. But you do think that we're going to have to hear extensive testimony on whether or not they said, do the police have to say you were free to go?
No.
How does that work?
They don't. And as you noted, it is actually irrelevant whether she says she felt free to leave. It's one of those reasonable person standards. So in her circumstances, what would a normal person feel? Would a normal person feel that they could have left? And that is it's really a bit of a fiction, right? Because she is the person in that situation. And
she's also foreign. So we have somebody else dealing with our police, being questioned by our police force. And then we have the issue of, does she think she's allowed to leave? Is that something too subjective, and that's not the standard?
Yeah, that's the thing. The standard is objective and not subjective. So that's exactly right. And here, I'm not saying this is an easy case or even a good case for the prosecution. In fact, this sounds like a serious uphill battle to get her convicted of murder with intent, when you're talking about the only evidence being, the body, so he's dead, but the only evidence really being her confession, and it's not recorded. Most juries in this country will look with what we might call a hairy eyeball at a non-recorded confession, because they just don't necessarily believe the police. And I certainly understand that attitude. So this is going to be a battle for sure.
And I think they've already seen, there's been quite a bit of press. ABC actually has done quite a bit of press on 2020 with Elizabeth Vargas interviewing the defendant, and the whole testing of the issue with the plug in the kayak and not in the kayak. And apparently that's not the way to drown somebody in a kayak, at least according to the experts. So that becomes problematic. And that kind of leaves us with the 12-hour taped interrogation by the police. This is 10 days after Villafor disappeared. And there she repeatedly denies killing her fiancé, said her desperate calls to 911 were real, and she's read her Miranda rights. And during it, she is, talking about, well, they'd asked me the same questions, and she actually won't give the same answers that they believe she gave. They sort of speak to her about, oh, you told us on the island, and she's not giving them what she allegedly gave them before. But some of her behavior is still odd, and she's not the world's most I mean, quote unquote, likable defendant. There's maybe some language issues, but she does seem a bit cold, and she doesn't seem all that broken up about her fiance's death. How does that play in terms of the jury, do you think?
I think that works to her disadvantage. But you know, because everyone just assumes that they know how they behave in similar circumstances. But again, the bad thing for the prosecution in this case, in addition to the non-recorded confession, is that her demeanor is also not recorded. So that's why I always encourage police when I train that when they're interviewing witnesses or suspects, they should always have at least a recording device, which, by the way, everyone has an iPhone. So they at least had that capability, and they should have recorded, because things like forthrightness, how quickly they answer a question, do they stammer, are they inconsistent? These things are all captured by recording, and we don't have any of that. But most importantly, we don't have her demeanor. So we have to take the word of the police that, number one, she confessed, that number two, she should have felt free to leave given their behavior, and number three, that she was cold, as if she didn't care that her fiance was dead. So again, the jury will have to take the word of the police really to convict her in this case, because there just isn't any other evidence.
Well, there is that 12-hour, once she's in talking to the police, there is a portion that's recorded, but it doesn't have the sort of make or break, as we discussed, comments that were allegedly made and were not recorded on that island. So, yeah, I mean, I think that they're looking at a tough case, but I was curious what you thought. Now, I want to move finally to the disaster that has become the Freddie Gray prosecutions. Baltimore police officer Cesar Goodson, who drove the van in which Freddie Gray was fatally injured, was found not guilty on Thursday on all charges, including the most serious count of second-degree depraved heart murder. Now, Judge Barry Williams disagreed with the state, saying that they had failed to meet its burden to show that the actions of the defendant rose above mere civil negligence. I guess that'll leave open a civil lawsuit. But Goodson also faced charges of second-degree assault, misconduct in office, involuntary manslaughter, manslaughter by vehicles, gross negligence, manslaughter by vehicle, criminal negligence, and reckless endangerment. Prosecutors had claimed that Goodson intentionally gave Gray a rough ride. They showed jurors video of Goodson sharply veering the van between lanes, claiming that's when Gray was flung around inside the van and broke his neck. And they say that Goodson was also responsible for buckling Gray's seatbelt and failed to get Gray medical attention despite his repeated requests. Now, 4 other officers are awaiting trial, but legal experts are now questioning whether those cases will hold up. So I have to say, in all fairness, Francey, you kind of predicted this, that this was going to be a complete and total, you didn't kind of predict it, you did predict it, a disaster. And this judge just doesn't seem to be buying anything. He actually said that, you know, why were people even checking on Gray if they wanted to give him a rough ride? And he just seems to be chucking these cases one after another. The Baltimore public waits outside. I mean, people that are concerned about Freddie Gray and want some sort of punishment for what happened to him and believe that the police were responsible for his death, since he was okay before he got in the van, allegedly. But what do you think is going to happen here? I mean, do you think that Marilyn Mosby, the prosecutor here, just really screwed things up? There's also, by the way, before I even ask my question, issues about prosecutorial misconduct even in this, and the prosecution not turning over important evidence. So what do you think is going to happen next?
Well, this case, this entire set of cases is an absolute disgrace. Marilyn Mosby is disgraceful and ought to be run out of town on a rail. I mean, it is so appalling to me that she would rush in and what looks like now fail to investigate the charges in any adequate way whatsoever, indict all of these officers for what could have been civil negligence, as the judge said in the case, might have been negligence. And you can almost assume there was negligence if someone's alive when he gets in a police van and then dies later from the ride in the police van. So maybe negligence. But there is a massive chasm between civil negligence and criminal culpability, especially between civil negligence and depraved heart murder, which requires a complete willful disregard for the risk to Freddie Gray's life, which is just an absurd charge in a case like this. It always was. As you note, I said from the beginning, I thought these cases would fail miserably because there is simply no evidence of criminal intent. And kudos to the judge, who is under tremendous community pressure here and yet is sticking strictly to the law. And when you said specifically that the prosecution said that the rough ride evidence came from at one point when the van was turned abruptly, the judge specifically noted today that he watched that video himself at least a dozen times and just did not see it the way the prosecution suggests. And this prosecutorial misconduct, because it's just nothing short of that, this absolute unethical behavior of hiding evidence, I think at least 4 times in these cases. Again, she's a disgrace. She should be disbarred. I mean, if her office is hiding evidence and the judge found a Brady violation, the state prosecutors admitted that they held back the second statement of the eyewitness who was in the van at the time because they said, oh, we just thought it was irrelevant. That is a massive amount of ethical breach and misconduct, and somebody should be held accountable for that. And I really think they should lose their bar license over it.
Well, you know, we've talked about other instances of prosecutorial misconduct, and nothing ever happens with those. So I would hope that there is always that the courts begin to actually do something about the prosecutorial misconduct. If it actually occurred in this case, there have been allegations and there needs to be some sort of a hearing. But I have to tell you, it's looking more and more like Marilyn Mosby just pandered to an angry public, and that she didn't even use the resources that were at her disposal unless, I mean, the sheriff's, I mean, that there's also infighting between the police, and that she just sort of went ahead, and certain people were informed about certain aspects of the investigation and others weren't. And you also took issue with her statements, her public statements, about, you know, that there was going to be some justice long before these trials even began, which frankly I felt at the time it was at least an acknowledgement that maybe Freddie Gray was not treated with the respect and the diligence that he should have been. But now I'm beginning to feel that it also was calculated to make sure that none of these defendants got a fair trial. And I find that problematic as well. Like, I feel whenever a prosecutor does that, and yes, defense does it, but the prosecutor is supposed to be for the people and be held to a higher standard as far as I'm concerned. And that's generally, I find the whole thing troubling. And mostly I feel badly for Freddie Gray's family, because what a mess.
Well, it is, I mean, it is a mess. And of course, you mentioned, or we talked earlier about civil liability, and they settled with the city very early. In the case, the city admitted negligence. I don't know whether they were really, truly negligent, and maybe we'll never know. But what's really fascinating, I think, about this case that sets it a bit very much apart from most cases is that at least some of the officers have now filed suit against Marilyn Mosby. And given the behavior of the state in this case, typically prosecutors are immune when they're doing their jobs, but courts can pierce that immunity and have in the past. And with what looks to me to be a pattern of misconduct here from start to finish, she could be in trouble herself. She may have some civil liability.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see, and we will bring you back to chat about that. I want to thank you for being on the show. I want to thank everybody for watching. We look forward to hearing your comments. We had a lot of rough cases to talk about today, but I do think it's important that when Francey comes on, she doesn't sugarcoat it. And we're talking about the victimization of children. We're going to talk about the victimization of children, and if it's too much, then you should be concerned about it and should do something about it. If you suspect anything like that, any children are being victimized in your communities, it's our responsibility as adults to do something, as Francey has said over and over again, and actually dedicated her life to doing and serving all of us in that capacity. So I want to thank Francey. I want to thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time on Crime Time. Thanks.